So our next speaker specializes in innovation to bring new generations into contact with the great outdoors. So please welcome botanist James Wong.
So what I've decided to do is to basically take you through not from the scientific point of view, there will be a little bit of this, but this is how this really engages with your consumer. My job is as a scientific communicator, and it's how does that actually tie up with how your consumer thinks about it? And I thought I would entitle my talk, my agent gave me a call earlier this week, she's like, you haven't given them a title, James, what are you going to call it? And I'm like, right, well, I will call it the question I got when I was last on Gardener's Question Time. So first guy comes up, he sits down, they're like, first question, please. And he goes, gardening, what's the point? And then they look at it, James, answer that question. And on Gardener's Question Time, you do genuinely get to have to answer that question like with 1 second of thought. So I said to him, well, what does gardening mean to you? Like, what do you see gardening as? And he went, well, it's like mowing the lawn, like sweeping leaves, sort of like outdoor tidying up. I'm like, yeah, there's absolutely no point to gardening if that is the way you think about gardening. And I said, and where have you got that impression of gardening from? Garden centers, get dragged around them by my wife. Television, like it's all like tidying up, like putting the plants in before the makeover appears. We have, in a really fascinating way, managed to convince a whole generation of people, not only a younger generation of people, but people who are my mum's age, for example. My mum is so not into gardening. To see the miracle of life unfolding in front of you as outdoor tidying up. And there are so many massive benefits that gardening can have, but the way we talk about gardening never addresses those. So, for example, I write a column for The Guardian, actually The Observer, I think it's called on Sunday, and I write for like the RHS and I write for a bunch of people, and the number one thing I get told by editors is, right, James, we need topical tips, we need the jobs to do list. And I'm like, sod that. Like, seriously, sod that. Because can you imagine if I was a food writer? What would you write for jobs for the week if you're a food writer? Well, this week it's time to reorganize your spice rack, defrost the fridge, and maybe clean out that bit of cheese at the back of the fridge that you've had for ages. That is completely not how food media talks to its audience. Food media does not talk about the how-to. It does not tell you how to boil an egg. It may tell you it in a convoluted way in an overall message, but it tells you why you need to boil that egg, why the food that's home-cooked has massive benefits, theoretically, over what you can buy in a supermarket that's pre-prepared. Why get the social benefits of getting your mates round is so important. And that has changed. That's changed really since people like Jamie Oliver, who always gets the credit for everything, but I think he's great. But I really think it begins with Floyd's, like back in the day in the 80s. Do you remember cooking shows in the 80s? Like where it would always be like a white chef's hat in a fake kitchen, and the ingredients used to scroll up on the screen, all measured out, and everything would be measured out in those tiny little dishes before. And you had to like scribble everything down. Have you noticed they used to be called cookery shows? What are they called now? And what they've transformed how we think about food in the UK? They're called food shows. It's not about the cookery, it's not about the process. If you want the recipe, just go to the damn website or buy the guy's book. Really, it's about the social aspect, or embracing the joy of the ingredients, or learning about where those ingredients have come from. So I'm going to do a talk on what I think is the most fundamental question that everyone in this room needs to answer. Not just you guys, but the whole of industry, the media stuff that I work on. The question is not how to. That assumes that people care in the first place. I grew up on how-to gardening shows, but I was weird. I was obsessed with gardening from when I was 4. I got my grandma in Wales to tape Gardener's World and mail the VHSs to me in Singapore. And I used to cry because she used to send me sweet pea seeds because Jeff Hamilton was doing them, and then they don't grow in the tropics. So I'm a bit weird like that, so I loved that stuff. But most people of my generation don't even know why you should bother in the first place. And if it seems like lots of work, if it seems like jobs for the week, frankly, I'd rather be on my Xbox or messing around on Twitter. I'd rather be doing anything else. So I thought I'd take you through this stuff. Do I have a clicker here? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to take you through why I think that science has demonstrated the huge benefits. Like Alice just talked about what the benefits are. I'm going to hopefully tell you why I think they're in the first place. Has anyone seen Jurassic Park? Okay, anyone like it as much as, no, I don't think anyone likes it as much as I do. Okay, so when they put on the night vision goggles when the Tyrannosaur's about to appear, and he's like, cool, night vision, puts them on, and all the screen goes green? When you see warm, I've got a picture here somewhere. Yeah, you seen that kind of image? Like you see it in like war movies and stuff like that. Do you know why everything's green in that? Any guesses? It's not because they could make it any color. It's not part of the technology. They could make that blue, they could make it purple, they could make it any damn color you want. It's always green because human eyes can distinguish more shades of green than any other part of the light spectrum. We're not very good at purple on one, blue on one side. We're not very good at red on one side. If you had this little graph, in fact, did I put the graph in? Yes. Green is, we can distinguish more shades of green than any other color. And we're actually quite unique amongst, well, not unique, we're unusual amongst mammals in being able to see that spectrum. And the evolutionary anthropology argument behind why we can see so many shades of green is to be able to identify plants. Because when you are surrounded by plants in a natural environment, being able to see the difference means you can identify them better, and therefore you can distinguish toxic plants, which you don't want to put in your mouth, from like healthy, safe things, which you do want to eat. Our whole biology is evolved around plants and understanding plants. They are the driving force for our evolution, and everything, a part of our body, every part of our culture, literally the way we see the world is down to that coevolution with plants. We are built to be botanists. We are built to find them fascinating. And that really shows quite how bad a job we must have done to have so many people who are not interested in gardening. So here's an example, if you don't believe me. This is called chromostereopsis. This does not work on me. I'm obviously a genetic flaw, throwback in some way. To other people, does it appear that those colors are popping out of the screen? Like some appear further away than others? In fact, some people actually see them as moving. It's a phenomenon called chromostereopsis, which happens to something like 60 to 70% of people. And it's because red should actually appear slightly further towards you, and blue and green should appear further away. We're designed, well, not designed, we have evolved. So red always appears closer to us, and green appears further away. This is built into how we understand color. It's not our actual eye, it's how our brain processes this color. And it's because if you're in the wild, red fruit shines out against a green background, appears easier to get hold of. Things that are high calorie and high in phytonutrients are easier. We perceive them as easier to get hold of, and they are easier to spot. So I often say that, red in fruit is a sign of nutrition and getting hold of it. And people are like, but isn't red a sign of danger in nature? Well, not in nature, but like, if you want to paint a danger sign color, what's a really good color to paint it? Red, because it stands out and is easy to notice. That's why we have red telephone boxes, red buses. If you look at a streetscape, it is really easy. Show someone a streetscape for 1 second and then tell them where were the red objects, they're able to place them. If you ask them where any other color is, they can't place them. So that's just why graphic designers will know that red and green is awful in advertising. It's like part of graphic design 101. You can't use them together because they appear to float in front of each other. Even medieval artists apparently understood this. So they use red as the foreground and green as the background to make things pop out. It is literally part of our DNA. So here's examples of stuff that's red. Red cocktail dresses, red Ferraris. It's inappropriate to wear red at a wedding, for example, because it makes you stand out amongst other things. Green, on the other hand, is the exact same thing. It's the exact opposite thing. It makes you feel, instead of excited and energized, it makes you feel cool, calm. Blood pressure has been demonstrated to drop. There's a whole bunch of fascinating science behind this. This is also reflected in our culture. So, for example, if you type in the word painting into Google, everyone's Google will be slightly different, so I did some screen grabs. Thank goodness my internet history is not there, I just looked. There's always a natural landscape that is pictured, predominantly with plants featuring. If you type in motif, I couldn't really think of any other English word to describe this, but the only we're getting too close to the speaker, I'm going to stay over here. The only universal motif that is reflected across all art, all known art in the world, there's only one motif, and that's a botanical print, usually a flower is the central basis. And the idea is if humans could get excited about flowers when we were wandering around the Serengeti, if we found them inspirational and beautiful, we could therefore remember them. And therefore, we could remember the location of fruit in weeks to come, because flowers turn into fruit. So we are programmed in our deepest level. The only two types of art that do not have flowers are Inuit art, because, well, It's like a frozen waste. They don't have any flowers. The other type of art where there are no flowers is Arabic art. Certain types of Arabic art aren't allowed to, or certain schools aren't allowed to show representations of nature. So what do you get? You get tessellated tiles that appear pretty much exactly like flowers, but they're geometric, so they're not technically flowers. If you type in a view, what do people want to see a view of? There's really good evidence that in hospitals, people with an attractive view have better recovery times. What do people want to see a view of? Google will tell you. If I was going to ask you to draw stuff, but it would take way too long. If you look at what the views are, they're generally a body of water, they're generally an open area of planting, and an area of shelter. This is biologically driven into us, as when we create gardens, we create our perfect environment. Perfect human habitat has a water source. It also has an area called refuge, so you're refuging from predators, or you're just hiding from prey that you want to get hold of. And they also have prospect. They have an open area. So if you see the words view, if you see the words nature, you notice the same thing. So you have a protected space, you have an open space, and usually, not always, you have a body of water. This is our perfect habitat, the one that we gravitate towards and we feel most happy in. We have evolved to feel calm and confident and happy in those situations, to force us to live in them and get out of environments that are not good for our health. It creates stress when we're in those environments which are not good for our biological health. And that's why, when we're not in green spaces, we suffer. We suffer anxiety because it's a driver to make us go there. So, why do you suffer when you're in a cold environment? It's because your body is telling you that cold is not good, forcing you away. This is the exact same thing. So when people are very happy to dismiss horticulture and aesthetic aspects of horticulture as sort of a frivolity, a landscape architect friend of mine, a landscape architect actually said this to me. He's like, in Britain, what I do is basically developers garnish. It's like the parsley you put on at the end. We're like an afterthought. We just do the final little bit. This is the most fundamentally important aspect of it. Okay, and if you've got gardens, okay, you had a bunch of horrible, really twee images, but nevertheless, they also show that same basis. We need to become a lot better at telling people all the benefits that Alistair has mentioned. I thought I'd run through them really quickly. Okay, some quite dramatic images there for you. One of the studies Alistair mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stuff about correlation. And in science, correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. So I've seen a study, which is one that Alistair mentioned, where birth weights were significantly higher in areas where the pregnant women lived with more plants. And I was like, yeah, well, that's because they're richer. Areas where there are more parks are more expensive, like Park Avenue, Hyde Park. The reason why stuff is so expensive is because it's pretty. And rich people, healthier, surprise, surprise. Interestingly, one of the studies did this on a social housing project in the States. And they compared people who were all of the same socioeconomic demographic. And they compared streets with trees with streets without one. So it kind of took out that sort of financial factor. And there was still a significant benefit. Reducing crime levels, I think 32%, according to one of the studies. There are different measures of types of crime and fear of crime, but it's significant. There is some really good data from hospitals, not from hospitals, from prisons rather, and also prisons of a different sort. People who are suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The army uses it a lot. People can reduce their anxiety prescriptions when they're around plants. So you might think it's all a bit, because sometimes some of these studies sound a little bit hippie and fuzzy, like, oh, I feel calmer today. But when you really want to measure something in a cold, hard, objective way, if you're able to take less pain pills from it, that's a really solid measure. And that's been demonstrated in hospitals, in prisons. In the hospital study I mentioned, I kind of thought, because I'm really cynical when I read studies, they were like, well, people felt better and the recovery times were measurably quicker when they had a nice view. And I was like, and that demonstrates that plants are important. I'm like, no, it just demonstrates that a nice view is important. It could be Ariana Grande outside that window. Maybe that's the nice view that's important to you. Well, they actually did lots of different types of views. And significantly, they had a view of water, they had a view of just the cityscape, and they noticed that it was plant life which was the most important. Finally, in terms of health and exercise, so we talked about calorie burning earlier. There's a wonderful list with some stats. I do love a good stat. The fascinating thing about this calorie burning is that actually you burn per session more calories when you're gardening than you do in a gym session. And it feels easier. Caveat, gym sessions are generally shorter than gardening sessions, but basically what the difference is there are two essential differences. You're doing lower impact exercise for a longer period of time, so you don't notice it, and you're also distracted. You're also distracted by making decisions. You're not just looking at a flashing treadmill and the lights on that. You're making decisions, you're in the fresh air, and not only do they feel it was easier, they experienced less pain, and they had better psychological well-being after. It's well known that if you exercise, you get endorphins, you feel better. When you do this in a green space, so they put people on treadmills and basically give them a virtual reality green space around them, it was significantly better. I have never heard, worked in gardening media like 10 years, never heard anyone talk about these things. It's all how to plant up a window box. My mates do not care. What they care about is cleaner air. If you put an ivy plant in your room, I wrote about this in The Observer a few years ago, and this is what the Dutch new thing is based on, the new marketing campaign. It can take out something like 90% of the air pollutants in your air within 12 hours of being in your room. This is an ivy plant. This particular Dutch campaign, which I think is ingenious, has taken NASA research from the 1970s. NASA research was trying to figure out how to clean the air in sealed cabins when you launch something into space, and they couldn't figure out a way to do it that was really efficient, and they found that plants were the most efficient way. So they tested a bunch of very 70s houseplants, like really 70s, like gerbera and like aspidistra and ivy, like things that I don't like. But they tested them, and they've got the good data for them, and that's what the Dutch have based their new campaign around. And I was like, because I talk to them all the time, I was like, yeah, but the thing is, are people going to, they're a bit old-fashioned. I walked past a really cool hipster furniture shop called West Elm in Tottenham Court Road, the most polluted place in the UK, by coincidence. And they have a massive display of them. And the crazy thing is, I went in and I actually wanted to buy an ivy plant, and that's like, well, something wrong with me. I went and I wanted to buy one, and they don't sell it. You guys, I'm so surprised that when I look at terrariums, if you go onto Instagram, there is a whole generation, like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, go on it for 5 minutes, you will see that basically everyone under 45 wants to have a terrarium. I went to so many garden centers trying to buy the ingredients for a terrarium for a Fiskars workshop I did with bloggers. It's really, really hard to buy them. And funnily enough, I walked down Oxford Street, and then I could buy them in Urban Outfitters. I could buy them in Zara Home. I could buy them in basically every... I could even buy them in like a hipster coffee shop, but I couldn't buy them in a garden center? There's a real issue with that. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for you guys to look at houseplants in a bigger way, because I think that in a home environment, if you're trying to sell these benefits, it can be quite difficult for a generation like me, Generation Rent, who I'm resigned the fact that I'm never really going to have a proper garden. I use my mum's, I call it mine. I live in a central London flat. Houseplants are the way that it's most relevant to people most of the time. They can be taken when you move, and most of these studies demonstrate that it doesn't matter what kind of green space it is, it matters about the context of how much time you spend around that green space. And houseplants, stuff that's outdoors, well, in the UK, is like green for 6 months of the year. The rest of the year, it's kind of miserable. And that's why your sales are kind of miserable, apart from Christmas, for a good 6 months of the year. Houseplants are a way that you can sell stuff and appeal to people and get people involved and excited about stuff for the full year in a way that's measurably more important because it's around them for more of the year. I think that's about it. I'm going to shut the hell up. If you have any questions, feel free to fire them on up. Yeah.